Amnesia 33 TCP/IP flaws affecting millions of IoT devices.
So, Ganesh, we have heard over the years so many stories about Internet of Things vulnerabilities. Um, and rarely do we see a number of them come out at once, and certainly not quite as many as we're talking about today. So, what can you tell us?
That's right, Matt. Thanks for asking the question. Basically, as you said, this is one of the, I think, most extensive studies ever done with respect to TCP/IP stacks. And this has been carried out by four Scout researchers under the name Project Memoria. Uh, and they did this study across, I think, 7 open source TCP/IP stacks. And when they did this study, they found 4 of those 7 IP stacks were vulnerable to various vulnerabilities. I think they found about 33 to 34 vulnerabilities in these 4 open source TCP/IP protocol stacks. What are the 4 stacks? Are there UIP, FNAT, Pico TCP, and NAT/NET? What are these? I mean, we all know extensively these are all widely used across various embedded devices, IoT devices. I think system on chips, which are used across power grids, healthcare, various. You can name it any plethora of IoT devices. You will find any 4 of these vulnerable stacks on them. What is the motive for them? If you remember back, I think in the middle of this year, there was another study done with the name Ripple 20. At that time, I think they found about 19 vulnerabilities in various software libraries I think, track systems. And at that time, they said about billion plus devices were vulnerable. And it was a classic example of a supply chain attack and which have cascading effects and not only one single provider or vendor, but it can have multiple, ripple effect across the industry. I think that's what we are seeing in this case also. They also, Focus Research also said that that is one of the bases for them to carry out this TCP/IP stack attack. Why is it such a big ask or maybe a big problem? We all know TCP layers are typically based on network layers, right? I think you have application layer, link layer, which are those. But basically, you have these TCP/IP stacks moving around stuff from one place to another. And how is this implemented? We all know it's by means of protocol stacks. What is protocol stack? In sense, basically, it's a software, right? Written in low-level language. So because it's based on a low-level software language, it gives for any attacker to basically huge swath of attack vector. For example, it is not dependent on any vendor or product, right? Because you're looking at the network protocol. For example, an attacker can get into one network using one of these protocol stacks. Basically, he got access to a whole network, maybe multiple networks, irrespective of there's any vulnerable products or devices in there. I think that is where actually this huge problem comes into picture. But these researchers said they think millions of devices are vulnerable from about 160 vendors. But I believe if you look at broadly, I think it might run into billions in the sense. Maybe you can agree with me. Typically, embedded systems have longer vulnerability lifespans. It takes a long time to fix them.
Yeah, they don't get patched is usually the case.
Yeah, that's the next point I was about to say. Because the big problem is because of the patching. How do you patch it? Because it's so hard to do the patching with most of these IoT devices. So what happens is these all patches and issues basically trickle down across various vectors, maybe supply chain. And when you take into account, maybe it could be the vulnerable surface could be billions of devices. So because of this impact, what CISA and everybody does is they did a security advisory and asking organizations and the vendors to take a look and come up with solutions or patches like that.
There actually is a scanning script from Forescout that is now available. But it's an interesting one that comes with a lot of caveats. Basically,
Okay.
they've got the way to fingerprint 4 of the TCP/IP stacks that we've been talking about that these vulnerabilities reside in. The downside is that some of the testing mechanisms, they can't guarantee that they're safe to run against arbitrary TCP/IP stacks. I mean, these are intentionally malformed packets that you're sending out here, and they're meant to help you find vulnerable devices, but there's no guarantee that they won't cause unexplained or unexpected behavior in other devices. So they have said, as part of this, and I'm looking at it on GitHub here, run these things against devices you'd like to test that are yours and that are in a controlled lab environment, because it's something they don't recommend you run against the wider your company or the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Matt. I think any of these tools should be tested in a controlled environment. And maybe probably you have ownership of that environment, obviously. Hopefully that is the case.
It makes me worry, though, of course, that someone may not follow this advice. I mean, if you wanted to cause a little bit of consternation on the internet, you could run this across all of the IP space that's out there. Guaranteed, I can't say guaranteed, but you'd probably cause some devices to fall over if you did this.
Yeah. The problem with any of these GitHub or tools are available on public internet. Sometimes users unknowingly, they want to just test it out. By knowingly they invoke these tools, maybe that will cause also alarm. I think there should be, I don't know how to put it mildly, I think responsible disclosure and maybe responsible usage by the users also who is using it.
I think if there were a way to do that, I think the folks at Forescout would have already done this. Like, they've probably contacted these vendors already to tell them you have problems. Now the question is, I mean, there's probably going to be some delay in getting patches out and all that. If you are somebody running this operationally, any of these devices, you'd like to know about it so that you can do something in the meantime. And probably that's going to end up being pull those devices off the network. It may be possible to come up with your own patch for some of these things if you happen to have the source code, but I'm not expecting that to be the case for most people. If they find a vulnerable device, they're going to find a way to mitigate it, and that probably involves taking it off the network.
Yeah, maybe that would be the best decision sometimes, just to pull the plug. I just want to wrap it up by saying out of these 33 vulnerabilities, there were 3 very critical vulnerabilities with a CVS score of 9.8. I mean, 10 being the max. So they have given CV ratings for these of them. And obviously, they fall off UIP, Pico, TCP, .NET. So basically, 3 out of the 4 protocol stacks which are vulnerable. So it's not surprising that 3 of them have 9.8 from one of those 4 TCP/IP stacks. I think as of this morning, I think some of the vendors have already started working on it, probably giving advisories to their supply chains. And nothing so far I have had any patches or updates have been available right now. But I think the scenario is changing. Probably, whoever has have these kind of devices, they have to keep an eye for some sort of updates from these vendors. So I think I felt this is timely in the sense we are seeing so many supply chain attacks nowadays. I think it's a reminder that we should not ignore those also, and that is the point to bring up the story to the team now.
In this case, we're talking about supply chain provided vulnerabilities, not necessarily attacks. But yes, this is something that you just have to be aware of the provenance of all of the code that's running on your systems, which is, not an easy task. But I don't know how else you're going to defend yourself against this sort of situation.
Yeah, I think that is the case with Ripple 20 also. Even the fix was easy, but getting the vulnerable devices fixed was a hard task. I guess it would be the same scenario in this case, but we got to try as much as to reduce the attack vector.